$9 billion. Just let that sink in for a second. At its peak, that's what the startup Theranos was worth. This was a company that promised to change, well, everything. But here's the kicker. That whole $9 billion valuation, it was all built on a massive lie. And at the center of it all was this woman, Elizabeth Holmes. You've probably seen the pictures, right? The signature black turtleneck, the intense stare. She was everywhere. People were calling her the next Steve Jobs, a true visionary who was going to completely upend the entire healthcare industry. Yeah, about that revolution, it was all smoke and mirrors. So how on earth does a company that's celebrated, that's worth $9 billion, become one of the biggest, most infamous frauds Silicon Valley has ever seen? That's a question we're going to dig into. Let's break it down. Okay, so first things first, we have to talk about the promise, the big idea, because this is what hooked everyone. We're talking world leaders, big-shot investors, you name it.
And the vision, you gotta admit, was absolutely brilliant. The pitch was so simple. Forget about those giant needles. Forget giving vials and vials of blood. What if you could run hundreds of tests, everything from your cholesterol to cancer markers, from just a tiny pinprick, a single drop of blood from your finger? It sounds amazing, right? It was so compelling that it brought in almost $900 million from investors who bought it, hook, line, and sinker.
But here's where the story takes a very dark turn. Behind that incredible promise was, well, a really elaborate, carefully constructed lie. So let's start peeling back the layers on this thing. Okay, this right here, this slide tells you everything you need to know. The claim was their own special Edison machine could do it all. The reality, the device was a total dud. It just didn't work. So what did they do? They cheated. They were secretly running the tests on standard off-the-shelf machines from their competitors. I mean, it's just a blatant deception that completely contradicted their entire sales pitch. And this wasn't just a one-time thing. The deception was baked into the company's DNA. They were faking product demos for investors and partners. They were literally doctoring their own research to make the results look good. Quality control checks, if they failed, they just ignored them. They'd even throw out test results that didn't fit the narrative to make their machine look more accurate. You have to understand, these weren't just mistakes or growing pains. This was a deliberate, systematic cover-up, day in and day out. So you're probably thinking, wait a minute, with all this going on, how did nobody catch on? And that's the crazy part. The red flags were flapping in the wind, but it seems like all the right people were looking the other way. Which brings us to a really important question. Who let this happen? Who were the enablers that allowed this fraud to fester and grow for more than 10 years? Well, for starters, look at their board of directors. It's like a who's who of former secretaries of state, generals, a ton of political heavyweights. And that gave them this incredible aura of legitimacy. But take a closer look. Who's missing? Where are the doctors, the scientists, the medical experts? Yep, pretty much non-existent. There was basically no one on the board who could actually challenge the science. And you have to believe that was totally intentional. And what was it like on the inside? It was a culture of extreme secrecy and fear. If you worked there, you learned very quickly you do not question the technology. You just don't. It was basically career suicide. Anyone who dared to raise a concern was silenced, intimidated, or just pushed out. But then you have this guy, Tyler Schultz. He's a whistleblower, and he has a pretty powerful connection. His grandfather is George Schultz, who's on the board. So Tyler sees all this fraud happening firsthand, and he does what you're supposed to do. He goes straight to the top, to Elizabeth Holmes herself, and lays it all out in an email. The doctored research, the failed quality checks, everything. And the response he gets back, it's from the company president, Sunny Balwani, and it is just pure intimidation. He basically blows off all of Schultz's legitimate concerns and then hits him with this line. It's a thinly veiled threat, saying, "The only reason I'm even dealing with this is because of your grandfather." The message couldn't be clearer. Back off and shut up. Tyler Schultz quit that very same day. Okay, so this whole story isn't just about one bad company or a couple of bad actors. It really blows the lid off a huge systemic problem, something you could call the unregulated unicorn problem. And that begs a massive question, right? How did they raise hundreds of millions of dollars with apparently no one doing any real financial digging? Where was the scrutiny? Well, a big part of the answer comes down to one word: unicorn. You've probably heard this term. In the startup world, it's the holy grail. It means you're a privately held company that's valued at over $1 billion. And for a company like Theranos, achieving that status was basically a license to operate in the shadows. See, because they stayed private, Theranos got to sidestep all the rules that are there to protect investors. Think about it. They didn't have to file public financial reports with the SEC. They didn't have to certify their numbers under big deal laws like Sarbanes-Oxley. No mandatory independent audits like public companies have. They basically got to operate in a massive regulatory blind spot, completely free from the kind of intense scrutiny that almost certainly would have exposed this fraud years and years earlier. And that's the really dangerous part about this whole unicorn chase. Operating in the shadows of the private market with almost zero transparency or real oversight allowed Theranos to raise over $700 million based on nothing but lies. And if you were an investor, there was just no way for you to know what was really going on, not until the whole thing imploded. But here's the thing about a lie this big. You can't keep it going forever. Eventually, that house of cards is going to come tumbling down. And for Theranos, the beginning of the end was in October 2015. The Wall Street Journal published a total bombshell of an expose that just blew the lid off the whole thing. And once that first domino fell, everything else followed. Walgreens, their biggest retail partner, bailed. The SEC swooped in and charged them with massive fraud. And just a few years later, by September 2018, the $9 billion unicorn was gone, dissolved, finished. So what happened to Elizabeth Holmes? The consequences were, needless to say, severe. She was ultimately convicted of defrauding her investors and was sentenced to more than 11 years in federal prison. And her former partner and company president, Sunny Balwani, he got hit with an even longer sentence for his role in the whole thing, almost 13 years behind bars. And on top of the prison time, they were ordered to pay restitution to the victims of their fraud. The number is just staggering. Over $452 million. You know, the whole Theranos saga is a wild cautionary tale. It's this huge warning about the dangers of unchecked hype and outright deception. But it really leaves you with a pretty unsettling question, doesn't it? In this era of private unicorns all chasing these insane valuations, all operating in the shadows with very little oversight, you have to wonder, how many more of them are just one journalist's investigation away from a total collapse?